And there are a couple of words that recur in this regard. One is the counsel of God's will. Now, this is not council. That is a council, that is a group of people that deliberate in a meeting as a panel discussion, but counsel, which has to do with the wisdom or plan or thought processes of God. The very word counsel suggests intelligence and an intelligent reason for acting. God never wills apart from his own counsel. A person who is completely arbitrary has no counsel, takes no counsel, listens to no counsel, just does it. And so the very word counsel should alert us that the biblical idea here of God's sovereign grace is rooted in the wisdom of God, in his own thought, which is perfect. It's not irrational, but it is eminently rational, far from arbitrary. Another word that is used again and again with respect to predestination and election in the Bible is the word purpose. The word purpose. In the Greek, we use the word telos. Some of you may be students of philosophy and know that philosophy studies several different subdivisions of thought. One is metaphysics, one is cosmology, another one is epistemology, another one's ethics. But one of the subdivisions of the study of philosophy is the science of teleology. Teleology, it comes from the Greek word telos, which means end, purpose, or goal. Some of you have heard of the various arguments for the existence of God. The cosmological argument that reasons from the world, the cosmos, back to its creator, to God. But one of the persistent classical arguments for the existence of God was called the teleological argument for the existence of God, namely that the universe as we know it exhibits a certain orderliness, a certain design, a certain symmetry to it that suggests an intelligent planner to it, and so on. So that the word telos has to do with ends or goals or, if you will, purpose. Now, somebody that does something completely arbitrarily does it for no purpose. Now, far from God's election being purposeless, the New Testament makes it clear that there is a divine purpose in God's electing grace. And the purposes that are mentioned are, first of all, to make manifest the riches of his grace, to display his mercy, that is, to reveal something about his marvelous character, which his grace certainly does. It makes manifest his awesome, marvelous, beautiful mercy. There's also another purpose, and that is the purpose of honoring Christ. Remember the promise to Christ that he would see the travail of his soul and be satisfied. The old Pelagian view had Jesus dying on the cross hoping that somebody would take advantage of it and be saved. He said, I'll do the work of atonement, but it's up to you to determine your destiny. And in that schema, it would be theoretically possible that Christ could have died completely in vain, that no one would ever have responded positively to the gospel, and Christ would have died and not been the firstborn of many brethren. But according to the determinate counsel of God, God determined from the foundation of the world that the cross of Jesus Christ would yield its appointed fruit, and that Christ would see the travail of his pain and suffering and of his death and be satisfied. Notice that when the New Testament speaks of election and of predestination, it always speaks of our being elect or chosen in the beloved, in Christ. People ask me, R.C., why are you saved and somebody else isn't? Again, we'll explore that question later on even more fully. But when I look into my own heart, into my own soul, and look at my own life, I cannot give any satisfying answer as to why God would bother to save a wretch like me. I wish we really believed the words of amazing grace. I wish we would properly be amazed by the grace of God. But what really amazes us is his justice. We take his grace for granted. As I say, we've changed Henry Higgins' song just a little bit and sing, I've grown accustomed to his grace. And we assume it, and after we assume it, we begin to presume upon it. And as I said, the bell needs to go off in our head when we think that we deserve grace. I can't think of any reason in R.C. Sproul why R.C. Sproul has been a brand snatched from the fire. Had God determined to treat me simply according to his justice, as David said, if the Lord marked iniquities, who would stand? I wouldn't stand. The only way I can ever get in the kingdom, or anybody can get in the kingdom, is through the sovereign grace of God. And by that grace alone. Sola gratia was the theme of the Reformation. By grace and by grace alone. Now, the only reason that I can find in the New Testament for anybody's being a Christian is so God the Father can bestow his glory and his love and affection on God the Son. The only reason we're redeemed, ultimately, is not because of our value, but because of the value of Christ. And that God is gracious to me in order to reward one who does deserve a reward, even his only begotten Son. So do you see the strange intersection there of grace and justice? It is just that Christ should receive an inheritance. And we are that inheritance. That we are that inheritance is grace for us, justice for Christ. Now, that's the purpose. And the New Testament says, why does God elect? Why does he choose us? That the purpose of God, according to grace, might stand. Now, we do everything in our power to knock that standing grace over and get rid of this doctrine from our thinking. But God's purpose that we understand the graciousness of grace and that we allow it to stand and that we're bold to proclaim it in the life of the church among God's people. Now, the other thing I want to call attention to that I read over rather quickly here in Ephesians is in verse 5, having predestined us to adoption as sons by Jesus Christ to himself, according to. Let me just stop there. According to. What does that phrase mean, according to? It means on the basis of. And it's not according to our foreseen work, or our merit, or our righteousness, or our running, or our willing, or our believing, or our anything. The basis of election is, according to this text, according to the good pleasure of his will, which he purposed in himself. Now let's talk about that phrase for a moment. Back to arbitrariness. I do something that seems to be arbitrary and capricious, and you say, why did you do that? And I say, well, I don't know. I just did it because I like it. You know, well, that's a reason for doing it, isn't it? To do it because you like it. But we even call that a kind of capriciousness or whimsicalness when people just do what they want to do without any regard for what is right. They're doing their own pleasure. They're doing it because it's pleasing to them. Now, this is one answer the Bible gives to the why of election. That the why of election is according to the pleasure of God.